Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast. We are live following the Timberwolves' exciting win over the Memphis Grizzlies on Wednesday. Marney Gellner of Bally Sports North joins the show to break it all down. The Locked On Wolves postcast starts right now.
You are Locked On Wolves postcast, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Your team every day.
And welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Marney Gellner of Bally Sports North is with us to talk through the Timberwolves win over the Grizzlies. And Marney, no Karl-Anthony Towns for the first game of what's likely to be many without Karl-Anthony Towns. Among other injuries, a very short-handed Timberwolves team manages to snap a 3-game losing streak. Again, very short-handed. This one was a ton of fun.
It was, and I think it was so unlikely. And I don't mean that as a knock on the Timberwolves, but you're thinking about the Wolves without Karl and then without Jaden McDaniels as a late scratch. He had missed the previous 2 games with a non-COVID illness, but he was at shoot-around in the morning, and we thought he was going to be a go. But when starting lineups came out at 6:30, no Jaden McDaniels either. So then you're thinking, oh, boy, our best defender is not playing in this game. So how are the Wolves going to stop Ja Morant and the Grizzlies at full strength minus Desmond Bane? And the energy and effort and jump that the Timberwolves had, I won't say right from the tip, however, they were down 11-2 to start the game, but they hung in there for the first half, and then they found some sort of just explosion in the second half that was really fun to watch. And I just don't think a lot of people saw it coming or even really knew what to expect without a Karl type Timberwolves team. But yeah, that was a good one tonight.
Yeah, in the start, like you mentioned, it was really weird. This was, I think, the third straight game now. The Wolves have flipped the script. For the longest time, they're one of the league's best first quarter teams, worst third quarter teams. And here we had the opposite tonight. And it just shows how fickle those sorts of, which quarter is your best quarter can really be. The Wolves started the game terribly, really only the first 4 minutes, because I think, were actually had a small lead at the end of the first quarter. But the third quarter was arguably their best quarter in this game. It was pretty weird. You mentioned how the Wolves defended Ja, and without Jaden McDaniels. Yeah, I mean, that's something to be, it was fair to be concerned about that coming into the game. But Wendell Moore Jr. got a surprise start. I think initially Jalen Noel was announced as the starter. Wendell Moore starts. Yeah. The Wolves ended up defending Ja. It was a really switch-heavy scheme, and they were really just trying to kind of like muddy the waters for Memphis, which is what you have to do against Ja Morant, because he wants to get in among the trees and draw fouls, and he did do that to an extent. But the Wolves really made him work, and ultimately he and Dylan Brooks combined for 12 turnovers, and in related news, they were both ejected in the final couple minutes of the game. But the Wolves really frustrated them with, like you said, the aggressive defensive scheme, active hands. There were some unforced turnovers, certainly, but Memphis, I believe, turned it over 24 times in this game, and the Wolves had a lot to do with that. I think some of those seemingly unforced turnovers were kind of frustration turnovers in a way.
Yeah, the Courtside website that we use for stats, live stats during the game, had Memphis for 27. And that would be a season high, tied a season high in the NBA for any team this season.
Oh, wow.
And that would be why the Wolves were still in this game. They were out rebounded by 30.
Yep.
Offensive rebounds were 20-5 in favor of Memphis, but the Wolves won the game by 8. I mean, it was just statistically incredible. When you talk about defending Ja Morant, or at least making him work and making him be inefficient, Wendell Moore Jr. got the start when Jalen Noel was initially announced or released as a starter, like 6:30. 5 minutes later, the Wolves made a correction to Wendell Moore Jr., who is a rookie, who has played very minimally, even in mop-up time at the end of games. But even Anthony Edwards, in his on-court interview right after the game, gave a nod to Wendell Moore Jr. and his defense, and just giving the Wolves a spark and giving them everything they needed and everything he had. And I mean, there were a lot of different contributors in this game, but somehow Wendell Moore Jr. in his first NBA start, in his first significant NBA minutes, was valuable, especially because of his defense.
Yeah, and he actually ended up only, I mean, I don't believe he scored till the second half. He only played 20 minutes in this game. Crunch time, Jalen Noel was on the floor for most of it. The Wolves kind of shuffled some offense, defense with him and Austin Rivers at times in the second half. But, I mean, all the way around, Wendell Moore played a solid game. Defensively, he had a timely three-pointer in the second half when the Wolves are kind of trying to hold the Grizzlies at arm's length there for a while, and it was kind of hovering around it, going back and forth. So, yeah, a strong game for him all the way around. Absolutely. We talked about rebounding. That's always an issue against the Memphis Grizzlies. They're one of the league's best offensive rebounding teams. The Wolves have been one of the worst defensive rebounding teams in the league. Going all the way back to the beginning of last season, it was an issue in the playoff series against Memphis. It was an issue again in this game. And you're not going to win very many games basically being doubled up on the glass. But, I mean, I think the biggest thing here was obviously the turnovers. We talked about that being the primary reason the Wolves were able to still win this game by multiple possessions. Also free throw shooting. I mean, Memphis sure seemed really frustrated with the officiating, but they attempted 11 more free throws than Minnesota, but they only made 3 more. Memphis shot 60% from the line in this game. And, the 12 points they left at the free throw line and the 12 additional turnovers they had really combated, the 30 more rebounds. And the Wolves actually, or I should say the Grizzlies actually outshot the Wolves from the 3-point line too, percentage wise. So, winning the 3-point battle in terms of percentage, winning rebounds by 30, but then giving a lot of that back, Memphis did at both the line and in terms of turnovers.
Yeah. And the other thing that the Wolves did really well was blocking shots. They had 11 blocks tonight. That was a season high for the Timberwolves. And Naz Reid had a career high 5, or tied a career high with 5. And Rudy Gobert had a few. Rudy had 1 rebound in this game. I mean, everybody who played, except for Bryn Forbes, who only played a couple of minutes, had more rebounds than Rudy Gobert. And again, I'll repeat, the Wolves won the game by 8. There were just so many weird statistical things that stood out in a game like this. But when you block 11 shots, when you force 27 turnovers, when you're just doing like those little energetic, like for a change, I feel like the Timberwolves irritated someone instead of someone else irritating the Timberwolves and getting them emotional and, getting Karl-Anthony Towns into some of his frustration flailing and Jaden McDaniels into some of his frustration fouling. I feel like tonight the Wolves did that to get Memphis irritated. And it's those little things, they added up to somehow statistically the Timberwolves winning this game by 8 points. It was wild.
Yeah. Another player we should talk about is Jalen Noel. He had a fantastic game off the bench for Minnesota, a really good first half, and then he came on strong. I believe it was kind of like early fourth quarter, and the Wolves were trying to build a little bit of a lead. He ended up with 24 points and 19 shots. I think as always, he squeezed the trigger as much as humanly possible. He actually led the Wolves in field goal attempts in this game. And I think in the first half, like in the last 5 minutes of the first quarter, I think he got up like 5 or 6 shots. It was crazy. But he was efficient in this game. And he was the only bench player that had a positive plus minus. He had a couple of assists, a couple of steals. I thought he competed defensively, to your point, related to block shots. I think that was just a function of being more active and having active hands defensively, being more aggressive. And I thought Noel, we talked about this actually after the game the other night on the postcast, is that Noel has really struggled throughout his career defensively, but recently that's been one of the issues for him. Even as he started to pick it up offensively, he hasn't been great on defense. And I thought in general, basically everyone that saw the floor for Minnesota competed defensively. And in Noel's case, that helped him stay on the floor as long as he did in this game.
Yeah, there are times when he's playing decently on offense and he still doesn't get the minutes because of exactly that. He's just not doing enough on the defensive end. But you're right, Ben, tonight was a different story. Somebody asked Jalen Noel in his post-game media session, it looked like you were really hunting shots tonight. And he just kind of looked at the guy and he goes, bro, that's every night. And it's so true. But, man, he can put them up in absolute bunches. But he made some big shots tonight. And Chris Finch was talking about the kind of an explanation of why Noel did not start the game, why they had his name in there for about 5 minutes before changing it. And he was saying, the Wolves needed the punch off the bench. If they don't put Jalen Noel in that starting lineup with Jordan McLaughlin still out and with Taurean Prince still out, Finch just doesn't have the firepower and the pop off the bench and the spark. So he wanted to keep Jalen Noel in that role because of that. And Finch said another reason was to give Wendell Moore Jr. some leeway, like if they were going to take some early fouls against John Morant, trying to defend him and slow him down and just be up in his face a little bit. If they needed someone to take some fouls early, that would be Wendell Moore Jr. It turns out that was not an issue, but I just thought it was interesting to hear Finch just give the strategy as to why Jalen Noel was not in the starting lineup. But really, does it matter if you start the game? No, man, if you finish the game. Jalen Noel finished the game. 24 points, season high for him. Really good night.
Let's talk about our presenting sponsors of the postcast. That's our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so we talked about Gobert briefly. He had a really quiet night, on a night where the Wolves played really well defensively. Obviously, Gobert had a hand in that. That doesn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet. The Wolves won the game, but they were also out-rebounded by 30. Gobert had 1 rebound. He only got 5 shot attempts. He only had 2 free throw attempts in this game. He was in foul trouble early, so he did only play 26 minutes. But it was really interesting. I mean, Memphis essentially sent 2 guys to Rudy every time the ball went up, is what it seemed like. And that's part of the reason he was in foul trouble. It's part of the main reason he only had 1 rebound. Because with no Karl-Anthony Towns, the Wolves were kind of having to play small the entire game. I mean, Naz Reid exclusively played backup center and played really well, by the way. We haven't talked about him. I guess you mentioned his block shots. But what does, moving forward, what do the Wolves try and do to keep Rudy involved, to get him involved a little bit offensively, or does it even really matter? I mean, we talked about this a little the other night. He was the best player on a very good team in Utah for years. And obviously he scored more than 9 points and 1 rebound per game. But what does this look like moving forward without Karl-Anthony Towns for the near future? And what does Gobert's role look like in the offense, do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's been fleshed out yet. I don't think there's an easy answer yet. And it might depend night to night. Like Chris Finch said, he's going to adjust that spot in the starting rotation based on the personnel that they're going up against. So maybe Rudy Gobert's role also kind of fades in and out, or in the purpose and the way they use him, maybe based on personnel, because Memphis is a pretty physical, big team. And you said Rudy Gobert was in foul trouble. He had 3 fouls in the first half that limited his minutes. He was frustrated. So I don't feel like this was a great Gobert game, but I also don't think it was, well, this is what it's going to look like without Karl on the floor. I think as we get 5-6 games into this, 10 games into this, because Karl's probably going to miss a month, probably 4 to 6 weeks is what most people are speculating. By that time, I feel like there should be a lot of answers to that question. And maybe when Karl comes back, this can be a much better, closer to a well-oiled machine, and that Karl can just kind of hit the ground running with, because not having Karl there takes a lot of the pressure off of Rudy, the expectation off of Rudy, some of the difficulties, the stresses. When are we working with Karl? When are we without? How are you playing with it? Just boom, he's out. No matter if you wanted this or not, this is what you have. This is the Wolves' time to figure out Rudy Gobert right now for the next month or so. And I don't think this is what it's going to look like night in, night out. And even in a game like this where he was not that involved, Ben, how about that alley-oop dunk from Anthony Edwards to Rudy that he was friggin' fired up about? Even though he wasn't a main part of this game, he factored in a big way at a key moment. It was the exact same way as the game where he did not have a field goal attempt, but made 4 free throws down the stretch and was pretty pumped about it. Like somehow he stayed engaged and ended up making a big impact in the game. That's what he did tonight.
Yeah. And on the one hand, I mean, like we could talk ourselves into, man, how's, say the Wolves get rolling, then you still have to fit Towns back in, and he's, the team's best player when he's going right. He's certainly the most consistent good player on the team, and how do you fit him back in? But on the flip side, Towns has played with D'Angelo Russell. He's played with Anthony Edwards. He's played with the majority of this roster certainly more than Rudy Gobert. And so theoretically, it's Rudy that is trying to fit in with everybody else. And we've talked on this postcast several times about, and I've talked on Locked On Wolves quite a bit about how it's more been the Edwards Gobert and the D'Lo Gobert chemistry and pick and rolls and the spacing and things like that. Yes, Cat and Gobert in a sense, but the Cat to Rudy connection's kind of already been there. So can Rudy come up, can he put together some chemistry with some of these guards while Cat's gone? And then can Towns just kind of fit right back in? I think that's entirely possible. Points in the paint. The Wolves were way behind in points in the paint in this game, and they ended up catching up. They were within a couple baskets. I don't know if they ended up ahead of Memphis or right behind them, but a lot of that was Anthony Edwards, and it was even D'Lo hit a couple of layups. I mean, the Wolves guards were much more active in the paint late. It wasn't as much Rudy Gobert, but that lob dunk from Ant to Rudy was huge. It came at a big point in the game, and to me, that was as impressive as several of those drives that Ant had, because he was in attack mode, but suddenly he flipped into, hey, I can also distribute. I'm keeping my head up. I can pass the ball. And sometimes this season specifically, we saw him pass the ball a little better, I think, late last year and into the playoffs, certainly. We've seen him get tunnel vision when he gets into attack mode. And even though he was super quiet the middle part of the game, I thought he still kept his head on a swivel down the stretch and made some smart plays that weren't just simply, hey, I'm going to shoot this ball no matter what. And I thought that was every bit as much a sign of growth as, all those tough layups he made in traffic.
I agree. His quarter scores were so bizarre. His quarter scores went 11, 0, 1, 17. And he played significant minutes in all four quarters. But I think that lob pass to Rudy Gobert was significant for the reasons that you said, Ben, for the game, but also just for the fact that Edwards has been one of the guys that, for whatever reason, has not been able to get the ball to Rudy. And a lot of times just hasn't even tried. And Karl-Anthony Towns has more than twice as many assists to Rudy Gobert than any other player on the Wolves team. So yes, to your point, Karl and Rudy have been working well together, better than any other pairing with Rudy. So to have Anthony Edwards be aware of Rudy rolling to the basket at that point, and when he is in the scoring mode, to be able to just instantly give it up and know that that's the right play, I think is significant for a lot of different reasons. Hopefully it is a sign that connection will start to come here in the next month or however long the Wolves are playing without Karl.
Next up is the Oklahoma City Thunder. They, without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, they were down by 20 plus tonight to the Spurs and came back and won. The Wolves have beaten OKC twice. I believe SGA played in one of those games, but not the other, if I remember correctly. Charlotte was only a week ago, right? I think it was last Friday. So let's not get too ahead of ourselves going into this game against what could be a shorthanded Thunder team. The Wolves do have 2 days off. So hopefully Jaden McDaniels, maybe Jordan McLaughlin, obviously we're probably not getting Taurean Prince back yet, but a couple of those guys gives them a couple more days to get healthy before Wolves Thunder Saturday, and then 3 off days before the next game. So these kind of abnormal breaks in between games couldn't come at a better time for the Wolves. And we'll see what happens against the Thunder on Saturday.
And to be at home and have these days off is huge for practice time, especially when you're trying to implement something new, which is playing without Karl-Anthony Towns. So you're right. Perfect time, because after playing Saturday, they don't play again until Wednesday. And again, they're at home for a couple of days of practice time. So that's super valuable. Comes at a perfect time for the Wolves right now.
All right, that's all I have for you tonight. Thanks for listening to the Locked On Wolves postcast. We go live after each and every Timberwolves game on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube page. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Subscribe and follow Locked On Wolves on all audio platforms, including YouTube. These episodes all post on the Locked On Wolves audio feeds afterwards as well. A big thank you for watching. A big thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.